Hey, Pastor, doesn't science disprove the Bible?
Isn't Genesis just a fairy tale?
Is God for real? Did he really create everything in 6 literal days?
Didn't God just use the Big Bang?
Why is there death and suffering? Really believe the Bible?
Didn't man evolve from apes?
For answers to these questions and more, stand by for Believing the Bible.
Welcome to Believing the Bible. This is Scott Lane with Terry Reed, Dr. Ken Harris, Dr. Carl Williams, and our producer, Jeremiah Rosenthal, all with the San Antonio Bible-Based Science Association. We are here to reassure you can believe the Bible from the very first verse. Today, we're going to take up kind of an introspection into what's happening in Christianity today. The Methodists had a split in 2024, and we've got some kind of interesting attitudes by pastors that are supposed to be from conservative groups, like a Southern Baptist pastor who basically is preaching evolution and believes that the whole Bible is allegorical. The grand problem here is that these groups have lost the Bible, that we have gotten to a point to where we think it's all allegorical or all a story, and we can write in whatever we want. One of the things I've done for years in churches that I've been in is I've run a course called Comparative Christianity, in which what we do is we compare the religion of that church, in this case Baptist, which is what I attend, with other religions. We'll bring in a Presbyterian minister and talk about what they believe as opposed to what Baptists believe. And then we'll bring in a Methodist minister and discuss their theology versus ours, a Catholic priest and discuss it versus ours, a Church of Christ minister and discuss their beliefs versus ours. The only time that I ever had an explosion in that, in which my people did not behave themselves, was when we had a Methodist minister. And what blew it up was the Methodist minister when we asked, okay, what is your authority? Do you believe in the inerrancy of Scripture and the authority of Scripture? And her answer to us was that Methodist theology is based upon a 3-legged stool of the Book of Discipline from our leadership, the writings of John Wesley, and the Bible. They put the Bible only on an equal footing with men's writing and with that of John Wesley. Now, incidentally, John Wesley is turning over in his grave hearing that because he had no such belief system. But this is the problem that led up to the problems that split the Methodist Church and lead people like a Southern Baptist pastor who believes that the whole Bible is allegorical. Guys, when you hear stuff like this, what are your thoughts?
You know, the Methodist split over the issue of homosexual marriage. But that, as you point out, goes back to what is the authority for our belief and our practice.
Understood. Starting in 2019, they had a conservative versus moderate or liberal votes to try and decide whether there or not, how they were going to deal with homosexuality and with the ordination of LGBTQ clergy. Whether they were going to allow pastors in and ordain them. And this is the big thing that split it, but I don't think it was only LGBTQ. I don't think it was only gay marriage. It was the fact that they divorced themselves from
the authority of the Bible.
From the authority of the Bible. This is all an authority of the Bible thing.
And, you know, Scott, this really began, 1920s, when mainline denominations like the Methodists began to bring in the notion of higher criticism in how they evaluated the Bible and anti-supernatural bias. Anything that was miraculous or supernatural was deemed to be legendary. It couldn't be believed. And that infiltrated throughout the Methodist Church, which led to this acceptance of homosexual marriage and gay clergy, things of that type that precipitated the split.
I don't want to beat up on just the Methodists because...
Oh, there's lots to go around.
Because we're within my own Baptist church, we have both conservative and moderate or liberal ends, which fight all the time over our missionary service and others. Terry, I think you were about ready to say something.
Well, I always get back to the point, you can't expect people to have biblical values if you don't believe the Bible. And if you don't believe the Bible starting with Genesis, you don't believe the Bible. I think we need to look at Jeremiah 15:19, where God's talking to Jeremiah and God tells Jeremiah, you must influence them. Do not let them influence you. I think that really needs to be the marching orders for the church today. And unfortunately, the church has been getting influenced by the world. The United Methodists, they had this article in their publication, and the article was, "It's time for people of faith to accept evolution." It says a UMNS commentary by Al Kuehling, and it was in 2011. And basically, the writer of this article, Al Kuehling, he cites Eugenie Scott, of all people, for the source of his article. And
one of the great theologians of our time. No,
and he gets all of his talking points from Eugenie Scott.
From a secular humanist.
Right. And an atheist who basically her goal was to get the church to compromise. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people in the church, they think if they compromise, the atheists will meet halfway, which is not going to
never work
happen. I get back to the point. If you don't believe the Bible, starting with Genesis, you don't believe the Bible. And we've talked about this before. Genesis tells us God created them male and female. So it only makes sense if you reject that. If you reject the Bible starting with Genesis, you're going to buy into this.
Which led into the Methodist split. You're listening to Believing the Bible. This is Scott Lane with Terry Reed, Dr. Ken Harris, Dr. Carl Williams, and our producer, Jeremiah Rosenthal. If you would like to learn more, go to sabsa.org. That is SABBSA.org. Today, we're talking about the split within the Methodist Church in 2024, but also really what we're talking about is lacking of belief in the authority of Scripture, lacking the belief of the authority of the Bible. Ken, what are your thoughts?
Well, when I went to seminary, I went to a very conservative Baptist seminary. But even there were professors. I recall one guy that I loved. He was an awesome teacher. But the notion that was brought up that the flood was responsible for the geological rock layers, and he was very quick to back away from that. He didn't believe that. And so, at the time, I didn't know enough to even realize what the implications of that. But it's in Baptist church, it's just like it's in Methodist church.
We had an article recently in our communique in which I related a Southern Baptist pastor who did a sermon in which he looked at Genesis 1, 2, 3, and basically said this was all allegory. In point of fact, it was his belief system that Genesis 1 through 11 is all just a moral story. It's all allegory. It's not the truth. My first question with something like that is, well, when does the Bible start to tell the truth? Is it in Genesis 12? You were just relating, Ken, discussions within seminary that were not believing in the flood. Folks, there are people within seminaries that question the miracles of Christ. When does the Bible start to tell the truth? There's a reason why SABSA has as our motto, believing the Bible from the very first verse. Because as Terry, as you pointed out, if you don't believe Genesis 1 and that God created them male and female, then you can't have two males marrying, or you can't have two females marrying, or, as recently occurred in Germany, you can have a polycule of 4 men. Boy, have we gone down the deep end. Because we have decided what is right and wrong. We've thrown God out. We've thrown the authority of Scripture out. Folks, what does it say when you, like that Baptist pastor, say that all of Genesis is allegorical, and we should just turn our theology over to the current science?
Well, we have to define what science is, number one.
Right.
And if we truly define science the way it should be, everything is found out by observable, testable, repeatable methods, we'll find that neither creation nor evolution is scientific. So by that definition, you can't use evolution as your foundation because it is not scientific. It is a belief system. Now, which belief system has the better predictors? And we find that the Bible's predictions, the Bible's information is more scientifically provable than anything that comes from the so-called science of evolution.
What happens to Scripture when we compromise it, say that it's allegorical, and try to stuff 4.5 billion years of history, a change over time of evolution? What happens to it when we try to read these things into Scripture?
It destroys its authority and ultimately leads to at least doubt or perhaps atheism, unbelief. It's inevitable that once you begin that process, over time, it will infiltrate and destroy a church, a denomination.
Paul said it very succinctly. If these things we preached are not true, we above all people are to be most pitied. In other words, if the gospel that he preached of Jesus Christ was not true, that means that basically the whole Bible is completely false. Because if one part's false, then Jesus had no reason to come. If Genesis 1 is false, Genesis 2 is false, Genesis 3 is false, then there's no reason for Christ to have come because there was no fall.
If there was no fall, why does Christ even need to return? We do great violence to the gospel by discounting the early scriptures. And we need to acknowledge the authority of the Bible from the very first verse. Believing the Bible now has a new way you can support our ministry and get some great gifts. For a donation of $10 or more, we will email you a copy of Repetition in the Bible by Jack Cassioni, which shows the Bible to be a self-proving document and shows God's protection of His Word over the ages. For a donation of $25 or more, we will also mail you a copy of Scott Lane's book, What If God Wrote the Bible, showing 6 things we should find in the world and in the Bible if God is the author of the Bible. To get these great gifts, send your check or money order to SABSA at 7620 Avery, Live Oak, Texas 78233. That's SABBSA at 7620 Avery Road, Live Oak, Texas 78233. This information for ordering is also on our contact page at sabsa.org.
Information for creation events in our area are on our website's calendar page. For more information or to schedule a presentation, go to sabsa.org or call 210-599-7240. When you go to our website, you can click on a link to our newsletter. Our website has a link for contact information on which you can order our newsletter to be emailed to you, or you can call us. Also go to whyshouldyoubelieve.com. That is Terry's website containing articles looking at current day issues from a biblical perspective. SABSA meets the second Tuesday of each month at 7 p.m. We are now meeting at Faith Lutheran Church just south of the corner of Jones Maltzberger and Thousand Oaks. There you will find biblical apologetics and creation science teaching found nowhere else in Bexar County, as well as the availability of books and videos on these important subjects. If you missed any part of this show, you can listen to the show anytime by going to the AM 630 KSLR, the Word in South Texas website. Click on KSLR Podcast, scroll down until you find Believing the Bible. Please join us again next Saturday for Believing the Bible. I'm Scott Lane, and for Terry Reed, Dr. Carl Williams, and Ed Salzveld, thanks for listening, and we hope you found today a reason to believe the Bible.